730,000 casualties were seen as a result of climate change in Africa in just the span of the past 2 years. During the 20th century, Africa went through several obstacles. The graph above shows some major conflicts like the Somali Civil War, Nigerian Civil War, and ethnic conflicts like the Eritrean and Ethiopian War. These wars and the damage caused by them have greatly affected the LDCs, its economy, and its population. It also contributed to a phenomenon that is still limiting most of the continent's growth today: climate change. My name is Maya Arengith, and this is Climate Change and its Effects on the Health of the Population in the LDCs of Africa. LDCs are defined as low developed countries. These countries are economically insufficient, suffer population pressure, soaring debts, and are heavily vulnerable to climate variations. The United Nations reports that Africa has the most amount of LDCs, the ones in the sub-Saharan Africa dominating the global list. This graph, represented by the World Meteorology Organization, shows that Africa's surface temperature has only increased, specifically by 0.9 Kelvin in the northern parts of the region. This brings me to my question. How has climate change affected public health in low-developed countries of Africa since the 20th century? With my research, I have found that climate change has negatively impacted the health of population in low-developed countries of Africa. The main consequences include increase in environmentally caused diseases, severe weather, malnutrition, and economic deficiencies. The increase in environmentally caused diseases. Africa is currently 1 degree Celsius greater in temperature than other countries. A. Craggs from the World Health Organization states that, quote, every 10th degree of warming will take a serious toll in people's lives and health. This graph from the World Meteorology Organization shows the temperature increase from 1961 all the way through 2019. The red bar on the graph shows that Africa's temperature has increased by about 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. This may not seem like much when compared to Asia and Europe. However, Asia is heavily dependent on carbon-based power generation, which is carbon intensive and will naturally increase in temperature. Europe was well industrialized before the 20th century. However, Africa sees more difficulty within its population. Outcomes like heat-related illnesses, respiratory and cardiovascular illnesses, and vector or waterborne illnesses are present in LDCs. According to the CDC, people who already have respiratory illnesses are at huge risk. Longer and more enduring pollen seasons are predicted as a result of climate change, which triggers disorders like asthma and anaphylaxis. Amplified risk of severe weather. The State of Climate of Africa reports that a number of cyclones and storms have increased drastically. 2019 was a very active year for the southwestern Indian Ocean cyclones. From 1999 all the way through 2018, Africa only saw 5 cyclones and 5 tropical storms. However, this number increased to about 11 cyclones and 4 storms in just a span of 1 year. As sea surface temperature increases, tropical storms are fed more energy. Generally, cyclones will die down after landfall due to the lack of moisture. But climate change has increased rainfall on the coast, allowing for more destructive and longer periods of cyclones. It has created more damage, more physical injuries, and contamination in the water. In times like this, evacuation doesn't seem like an option. Malnutrition is also a major result of climate change. This is the College Board stimulus, Migrant Mother, photographed by Dorothea Lange in 1936 during the California Dust Bowls. The mother in the photograph depended on the yield of pea plants for survival. When the droughts hit, the yield was not enough to provide a stable income or food source for her and her children. A very similar situation was seen in the Horn of Africa drought. According to the WMO, rainfall fell below 7% of the recorded average. The Horn of Africa, shown on the graph by NASA, affects the LDCs Djibouti, Eritrea, Somalia, and Ethiopia, just to name a few. During this drought, more than 3 million people faced emergency levels of food insecurity. Previously fertile enough land were now malnourished and could not provide enough yield, forcing families into malnourishment. Cost to access land water was too expensive to afford. Most LDCs had very low education, and people depended on subsistence farming to provide food for the family. An example of this is Malawi. Malawi is an LDC affected by the Horn of Africa drought and is now dependent on groundwater supply. However, groundwater supply is usually too expensive for low-income families to afford. Economic depletion limits healthcare facilities as a whole. Countries like Mali, Niger, Malawi, and Ethiopia are struggling due to rising rates of malnutrition and diseases. Human influenza is a common upper respiratory tract illness caused by RNA viruses. Though usually not fatal, interspecies gene reassortment can occur, and this can lead to deadly strains of the virus and global pandemics. This graph represents the vaccination rates of daily doses per 100,000 people. You can see that North America has a peak of about 700 daily doses per 1,000 people. In contrast, Africa's highest peak is recorded to show less than 100 daily doses. This is a result of the gap in development and economy. LDCs have inadequate economy that cannot provide for the facilities needed for the vaccinations. Low-income families are also hesitant to accept certain vaccination because of the costs involved. Like any problem, there are solutions. Finding optimal locations for healthcare services is really important. For example, Niger is a country with a population of 25.25 million people. This country does not have enough healthcare facilities to serve the people needed. Secondly, medical workforce should have more training and should increase in size. Furthermore, the education gap should be filled. However, a major limitation is the economic conditions of LDCs. With minimal government funding and public health services, public health services will not progress. Countries would need good enough infrastructure, meaning better funds. Another limitation is the education gap itself. With this issue already existing, education gaps must be the first thing to be overcome for anything else to occur. Thank you, and this is my work session.
All right. How did you select the strategies that you used to gather the information during your research?
To conduct my research, I first tried to sector out my perspectives, like agriculture, healthcare industries, economy, and the environment. Finding research, my research was found with census data of the United Nations and annual reports from organizations like the World Health Organization and the World Meteorology Organization.
Okay. And what advice would you have for other researchers who consider this topic in the future?
For other researchers considering this topic, I would advise them to go more in depth into the maternal care. Maternal care wasn't really covered in my research, as my research focused more on the economic depletions of the public health industry.